So presenting who has been awarded will be Milana Martinova, Senior Director of AI Solutions in our sponsor, Intel AI Products.
Good morning, everyone. It's hard to follow Peter, but he told me earlier this week that if you really wanted to learn something, you set up your workshop and you define the problem you're interested in, and you invite the people you want to discuss this with, and that's the best way to learn. So I'm kind of doing that on my team at our Intel AI Lab, and we define problems that we want to tackle and pick the partners we want to work with, including people like Peter from academia or corporations. And I just want to let you know that Intel AI Lab was formed earlier this year from the Intel Nirvana Systems team acquisition and other parts of Intel. We're a group of crazy people, neuroscientists, researchers, data scientists, machine learning engineers, and we tackle problems across the full stack from hardware optimization and defining future Intel technologies to different frameworks, deep learning framework accelerations like Neon or nGraph. We just released Coach, which is the deep reinforcement learning framework for researchers and scientists that can evaluate reinforcement learning agents very quickly and design new reinforcement learning algorithms. So we really try to tackle important problems. I'm personally very interested in problems of commercial value. And we work with, as I said, various partners. So if you'd like to learn more, talk to me or others from our team, or email us at intel.ai.lab@intel.com. And I hope you can follow up on intelnirvana.com for other news and things we're doing. We're publishing a lot of things lately. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the HRL Paper Award winner. That was unanimously selected by the jury from 20 paper applications and 4 finalists. So this is Anna Durhanian, and I hope she will excite you as much as Peter did. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much for the honor, and thank you all for being here. So I will talk about our latest options work, which actually conveniently has a little bit to do with that last challenge question, which is about temporal timescales and terminations. And this is work with my collaborators Peter Bronx, Pierre-Luc Bacon, Doina Prekap, and Tom Miller. Okay, so the talk will be about temporal abstraction. So temporal abstraction just means reasoning at different timescales. And so just once again, a simple, easy example of what this means, right? So let's say you're at NIPS and you want to attend a session. So this is the higher level action that you want to take. This action can be decomposed into slightly lower level actions, like you need to find out what it is, you need to walk to it. If you're still jet lagged, maybe you need to get some coffee. And then you can break those actions down further also, because they're also pretty abstract. And you have to look at a map, you have to take a step, etc. So I think the bottom part of my screen is not really visible. Is there? No. Okay. But that's going to be a little bit awkward later. Anyway, and so the idea is that we want to do reasoning at all of these levels at once. Okay? And so the way that we do this in reinforcement learning is through this nice framework called the options framework. We've heard a little bit about it already today, but here it is formally. Right? So an option is a triple that consists of 3 things: where the option can start, how the option continues through the environment, and whether or not the option terminates when it gets to a state. Okay? And what's really nice about options is that we can't see, actually we don't know. But so here's sort of the, is there, maybe I can search? Sure. Okay, amazing. So in the usual MDP, right, we have these discrete time steps that we move through time at a given resolution. On the other hand, we can have sort of a semi-MDP in which actions take a variable amount of time. Okay? And what's nice about options is that they are somewhere truly in between, because they induce a semi-MDP, but because they have this Markov policy inside them, we can actually kind of peer into the MDP and kind of recover the primitive action resolution. So this makes things convenient. So this talk will be about mostly the termination condition of the options. Okay? So the termination condition is basically a probability on the state of whether or not the option should terminate or not. Okay? And so what it does essentially is it determines how long an option is. Okay? So if beta is 1, then we terminate at every step and just have one-step options. Right? And if beta is 0, then we never terminate and can have very long options. So the reason that this is important is because option length itself induces this interesting trade-off, right? So just like what we know from learning from multi-step returns, okay? The longer, sort of generally learning from longer returns is a lot more efficient than learning from a single step, because we propagate more efficiently and explore better, etc., etc. So the similar thing applies to options. But with options, it's a little bit more tricky, because when we choose one, we kind of hand over the control to that option. And so if it's not very good, then it might actually do us more harm than good, right? And so, in fact, we can show that the shorter the options are, the more optimal we can actually end up being. Okay, so here's a sort of simple example that illustrates this. We have a grid world, we have an agent that wants to get from S to G, and we have these cliffs at the border of the grid. And they're not, so they don't kill the agent, but it's not desirable to travel through them. And we have these 4 options that take the agent up until each grid wall, and so the cliff. So obviously, if we just use these options, we're going to have our agent travel along the cliff for part of the time. So we want to stay inside the grid, but we don't want to interrupt our options all the time, because we would lose the efficiency that we have from having these long options. Okay? And so that is sort of the key problem that we try to look at in this paper, and it's how to benefit from the efficiency of long options, but not have to sort of suffer the consequences of the fact if they're not very good. Okay? And the challenge is that this termination condition, which controls that whole thing, is really intimately tied to the solution that you get when you do this, of your resulting plan. And so what we propose is to apply this sort of counterfactual reasoning that we have from off-policy learning to option termination, to be able to ask questions like, what would have happened if I terminated while still continuing to execute your option? Okay? And we give an algorithm that is able to do that. Okay, so just to make sure that we're on the same page, so what is off-policy learning, right? So it's the ability for the agent to be able to tell apart what it executes and what it wants to learn about, right? So typically you have a distribution that the agent samples from, and that's the distribution whose values or whatever we want to learn. In off-policy learning, the agent samples some other behavior distribution, but wants to learn about a target policy. And so one of the ways that one can learn in this setting is to try to put these distributions as close together as possible. So do something like importance sampling or likelihood ratio, right? But the problem is that that is really hard to do if you have longer trajectories, because these importance sampling products tend to not be well behaved. And so there's another sort of family of methods that can deal with off-policy learning, and that's instead of correcting in the probability space, correct in the value space. And so the key thing there is to have these expected TD errors. Okay, so this is just like a regular TD error, except in the next target state, there's that expectation with respect to the target policy of your current estimate of the Q values. Okay? And so if you prefer to think about it in the backup diagram, it's kind of, instead of looking at a narrow trajectory slice, looking at wider slices through the backup tree. And it turns out that that makes it a lot easier to converge in the soft policy setting. So we can write a number of algorithms that use it in this general form, where the algorithms can be differentiated based on the that trace product, that coefficient product that's highlighted in blue. And so what the algorithm that we will mention in this talk in particular is called tree backup, which did that first, and the coefficient that it uses is lambda times the probability of the target policy. Okay, so that's all about policy learning. Now into like the actual idea of the paper. So I just wanted to give the technical intuition of what is going on. So we said that options allow us to look into like on the single step resolution, and that's what we're going to do here. So let's say we have a single primitive SS prime step during an option O and some policy over options. So what we have already in literature is the inter-option TD error, which applies to every option. And so this is just like a regular TD error, except the next state target is now more interesting. Okay, so we still have the reward in the beginning and the state option value at the end, right? But in the next state target, now we have this mixture, where with probability 1 minus beta, the option continues and takes the value of its current, of the current option, right? And with probability beta, the option terminates and gets to pick a new option from its high-level policy. So if we look at this a little bit closely, it should remind us of something that we saw on the previous slide, which is that off-policy corrected TD error. Okay, so that orange expectation is basically this expectation over some target policy. So let's call that. Let's call it a target off-policy error. Symmetrically, we can do a similar thing for the blue term and just call staying inside the option as staying on policy. Okay, and so with that, with those interpretations, we can look at the classical intra-option TD error as this beta mixture between on and off policy learning. Okay, so this is just how things already are, we just give this new interpretation. And so our idea is to, instead of having that off-policiness be implicit in the terminations that the options have, impose an explicit off-policiness degree that will determine the terminations that we want to learn about. And we're going to do that by using what we know about off-policy learning. And so that's just what the algorithm Q beta does. And it turns out that it can also be written in that general form that we saw before, where the TD error is the same TD error that we just saw, right? So it's the intra-option TD error. But now let's say that the probabilities beta are some arbitrary target terminations and not the actual ones. So then we said that the trace product was something that was distinguishing between different algorithms. So what is it in this options case? So if we assume that our options execute with some behavior termination zeta, then the trace product is essentially just the probability that we have made it this far while executing the option. Okay, so it's the probability of continuing for t time steps, which given our behavior termination zeta comes to this product 1 minus zeta. So this is almost it, but not quite. Because now we have introduced this discrepancy between zeta and beta, And so we need to somehow account for it. And so the way we account for it is we need to correct for it inside the trace. But we don't need to correct for all of it. We just need to correct for the part that's off policy, right? And the part that's off policy is the orange part. And so we're going to introduce the tree backup style correction just for the orange part, and we're going to kind of leave the blue part alone with the degree that it is present. And so it turns out that with this, in this form, we can show convergence for an arbitrary target terminations beta, regardless of how the options actually terminate. And it's really cool because this algorithm is very similar, analogous to another recent algorithm called Q sigma that is kind of between on and off policy. Okay, so let's see if this actually works. Here's our example from before. And what we want to know is we want to know if we can run the continuing options that take us until the cliffs, but learn about a better behavior that stays within the grid. And it turns out that this is indeed possible, and QBeta is able to do that. So each of the plots, so these are just learning curves, each of the plots corresponds to a different target termination beta. Okay, so in the black line, in the upper right, is sort of the upper bound that you can get when you just use the options, because then you have the penalty by going along the cliffs. Okay. And so, so what we see is that when the target beta is 0, then nobody's able to do better than that, but as the target increases, then Q beta is able to learn the true optimal performance while behaving with respect to the suboptimal options. So we also have some results in pinball, which if I have time, which I'm not going to, I can show, but you can look at the poster. I also wanted to show the prediction accuracy because I thought that I would have time, but I think I don't. But the idea is that basically, indeed, we learn the correct values, and the longer the options are, the more efficient we can show that the learning is. And this is true for Q beta, but not true if you do plain intra-option learning. And so that's it. And so in conclusion, basically what we do is we propose to treat option termination through this counterfactual lens of off-policy learning. And another, I think, also major takeaway, especially from the paper, is that looking at options and multi-step temporal difference learning in this unified framework is very useful, because then we can use the results of the two things, kind of transfer them seamlessly between each other. And there's a lot of cool future ideas that you can do with this. So for example, when people learn options, one of the things that happens is that they often end up reducing to degenerate one-step things. But maybe by off-policy imposing a longer option duration, it could be possible to do something smarter. And another thing you could do is, now that you can do this off-policy explicitly, we can maybe learn richer options by learning about a whole bunch of different termination conditions in parallel, just like it's done with policies. And maybe we can get better representations. That's it. Thank you.
We do have time for one or two quick questions, if anyone wants to come up. And otherwise, all the spotlight speakers should come up here to the front, because we're going to have start the round of spotlights.
Thanks for the very nice talk. Just a quick question. Have you thought about how you might learn beta?
No, not yet. I think something like a board or a loop thing is interesting, where you maybe learn options just like a bit of a discrete set of betas, and then you extrapolate between them or something like that. You can be more, sort of less restricted to which beta you choose because you can learn about a whole bunch of them, and so you can choose something that's very long, and let's see that maybe you can find better options by considering shorter subsets of them or something.
Thank you.
Okay, last quick question.
Yeah, great talk. On a similar note as the previous question, do you think it might be possible to go even further than learn beta being like actually a function, so it could vary depending on the input or something? Would that be possible to extend your framework to something like that?
Right, so a function of what? Because it's already a function of state. So do you...
It's already.
Yes, it's a function of state. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Let's thank our guest speaker one more time.